Hi, I'm Bill Ohms. This is the first of a two-part video on making a cube box. In this first movie, we'll talk about making the cube box with a tight-fitting lid, and in the next video, we'll talk about decorating the sides and top and bottom with an ornamental lathe. Okay, we're going to start out with a block of African blackwood. It's got a little bit of sapwood on here. We want to make sure that the sides are all square and parallel, and the ends are nice and square. We can touch that up by just running it on a sander with a fence that's set perpendicular. The size of the block is 2 inches by 2 inches, and the length is 2 5/8. In the long direction, the length of the grain. Now, the first thing we'll do is mount it in our chuck and use a tailstock to make sure it's straight and centered before we tighten up the chuck. We're going to turn a tenon on the top, just barely smaller than 2 inches diameter, just enough we can get a grip on, maybe about 1/10 of an inch. Later on, that tenon will disappear. That's only for holding it. We're going to make the lid a 1/2 inch, so I'm going to mark from the edge of the tenon, not from the very top, from the edge of the tenon, a 1/2 inch. And we'll cut that on the bandsaw and separate the top from the bottom. After cutting the two pieces apart, first thing we'll want to do is remount the base and true up the face. Because the African blackwood is so hard to hollow, especially if you're going any depth, I'm going to use a Forstner bit, a 1 3/8 diameter Forstner bit, and drill in 1 5/16 of an inch. Now I know my tailstock is 10 turns per inch, and I want to go about 1.6 inches, so that's 16 turns. You want to make sure you use a slow RPM when you're drilling with a Forstner bit. The shavings should come off kind of like shavings of chocolate on a German chocolate cake, I would say. We'll mount the lid and do exactly the same procedure, except this time we're using a 1 1/2 inch diameter Forstner bit and going in 5/16 of an inch deep. Now comes an important part. Let it dry. The wood is often wet in these hard, dense woods. Now that we've roughed out the shape, we'll want to leave it on the shelf and dry for 2 to 3 weeks, perhaps longer, depending on how wet the wood was. If we try and turn the close-fitting lid now, it will just warp as it dries, and then we won't have a nice lid. Now that our piece of wood is dry, I'm going to move over to the metal lathe. You could do this with a wood lathe also. I just find the metal lathe is a lot more precise and easier to turn with a very hard wood like African blackwood, but you can use a wood lathe to do the same things. On the metal lathe, I'm using a tool that's pretty much a standard metalworking tool. In woodworking, we would call this a scraper. But most of these cuts will come very clean on the African blackwood. First thing we do is mount the lid on the chuck, and we're going to true up the face. When we're turning on the metal lathe, we want to have a very high speed and a slow feed rate. Now I'm going to enlarge the opening in the top. We drilled that with a 1 1/2 inch bit. I'm going to enlarge that to about 1.6 inches and then clean up the inside top of the lid. will sand the inside. I usually start with about 220 grit and go all the way to 1200 grit. Okay, and then we'll put a little bit of wax on it because the inside is basically finished unless you want to put some decoration inside the lid. That's something people often do. This would be a good time to do that. And I like using a toothbrush to get wax into the little corners. It works very well. And then buff the wax off. Okay, now we're going to work on the base. We'll have to mount this one in a 4-jaw chuck. We're going to do the same operations. First, get the top smooth and level, face it off, and then use a boring bar to clean up the bottom and slightly smooth up the sides. We're not going to enlarge the hole, we're just going to smooth it up. Okay, now that we've cleaned up the inside hole, we're going to turn a tenon on the outside. It's going to go down about 1/4 inch, and we're going to turn it to a little bit more than the diameter of the inside the box, and then we'll slowly take a little bit off until we get a snug fit. Now we can measure the diameter, and like I say, we'll get it down to within a couple thousandths, and then we'll take 1,000th at a time until we get it just right. Okay, and this should be our last cut. Nice snug fit. And now we can sand the inside and the outside and put on a coat of wax. So here we have our cube box ready for decoration with a snug fitting lid. Now that we've made our cube box, in the next video we'll talk about decorating the sides and top and bottom with an ornamental lathe.